They laughed when Tara Hendricks corrected a man worth $40 million. Nobody in the room thought about what was going to happen 3 months later, when that same man stood at the back of her event with no reservation and no way in. The Grand Ashton Hotel's Crystal Ballroom had been rented out for the National Wine Guild's annual gala, which meant the chandeliers were lit, the string quartet was playing something expensive sounding, and every surface that could be polished had been polished twice. Tara moved through the crowd the way she always did, quietly, efficiently refilling glasses before anyone had to ask. Her uniform was the deep navy of the hotel's service staff. Her hair was pulled back in a low knot. Nobody looked at her directly, which was, in her experience, exactly how events like this preferred their staff to exist. Sterling Wolfe stood at the center of it all. He was 54 years old and built like a man who had spent those years being told he was right. Silver hair, bespoke charcoal suit, the kind of easy smile that telegraphed he had nowhere better to be and knew it. He held a microphone the way some men hold a glass, like it was already his before someone handed it to him. True mastery in wine, Sterling was saying to the assembled guests, his voice carrying easily over the quartet, cannot be cultivated from books alone. It cannot be learned behind a bar or a service counter. He paused to let that land, his gaze drifting, deliberately, Tara thought, toward the servers stationed along the walls. Excellence in this field comes from immersion, from education, from pedigree. From knowing, he said, not just pouring. The room applauded. Tara was refilling a glass near the tasting station when she heard him describe the 2009 Chateau Moreau on display as the finest expression of Medoc terroir of that decade. She stopped. The 2009 Chateau Moreau was from Saint-Emilion, not Medoc. The distinction wasn't a small one. It was, in fact, the kind of distinction that anyone with Sterling Wolfe's supposed expertise would not get wrong in front of 200 industry professionals. She raised her hand. Not loudly. Not dramatically, just a hand going up, the way it might in a room where people were actually allowed to speak. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was steady. "Chateau Moreau is Saint-Emilion. It's a right bank wine, Merlot dominant. It's structurally the opposite of Medoc." The silence lasted exactly long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Sterling Wolfe laughed. And the room laughed with him, the way rooms laugh when someone important sets the tone. "Well," Sterling said, tilting his head toward her with the expression of a man delighted to have found a prop, "our wine server has opinions." More laughter. A photographer near the stage actually turned to capture her face. The woman in navy holding a half-empty bottle being pointed at by the man with the microphone. "I'm not wrong," Tara said. No. Sterling held up a hand, the smile widening. "I think this is wonderful. Why don't we make this interesting? The National Sommelier Challenge preliminary round is in 6 weeks. Any guild member can enter." He looked at her directly. The smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'd love to see what our server could do on an actual stage." The applause this time was half amusement, half curiosity. Tara didn't look away from him. "I'll be there," she said. That was when she noticed the man near the tasting table who wasn't clapping. Jude Harlow stood with a small notebook in one hand and a glass of the contested Chateau Moreau in the other, watching her the way a person watches something they're trying to memorize. She didn't know his name yet. She only knew he wasn't laughing. The service hallway behind the Crystal Ballroom smelled like dish soap and the ghost of 100 catered meals. Tara was wrapping her station down when she heard footsteps. "You were right about the wine," Jude said. "By the way." She turned around. He was still holding the notebook. Up close, she could see it was a journalist's notepad, small, spiral-bound, half its pages already full. "I know I was right," she said. Most people in that room knew it too. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. He's Sterling Wolfe. Jude Harlow, wine critic, culinary review. He extended a hand. "Tara Hendricks. You signed up before tonight, didn't you?" he said. Not a question. 2 years ago. Tonight just moved things along." He looked at her for a moment. Then he asked something nobody at the gala had thought to ask. "Where did you learn?" Tara reached into the front pocket of her apron and pulled out a slim leather notebook, worn at the corners, the spine held together with a rubber band. She held it a second before putting it back. "From the best teacher I ever had," she said, "and from practicing on my own, and from every shift I've worked in this hotel." Jude didn't say anything immediately. He stood in the humming quiet of the hallway and let the answer exist without filling it with a follow-up question. She noticed that most people didn't know how to do it. The preliminary has 30 entrants, he said finally. Top 8 advance. Sterling is a guaranteed seat in the final. I know. Are you actually good enough? Tara tilted her head. Show up and find out. Before we go any further, drop a comment and let us know what country you're watching from. And at the end, rate this story from 1 to 10. We read every single one. The hotel's wine storage room was technically off limits after midnight, but technically was doing a lot of work in that sentence. The cellar master left at 10. And Tara had been going down there every night for 3 months with an unlabeled lineup and her grandfather's journal and no audience but herself. Jude found out on the 4th day of what he'd started calling, in his notes, the preparation. You practice down here alone, he said, standing in the doorway with 2 takeout coffees, at midnight. The acoustics are good. For wine tasting. For thinking. He looked at the rows of unlabeled bottles she'd arranged on the tasting table, and at the worn leather journal lying open in the corner. He nodded toward it. Can I see that? She hesitated. She'd been carrying that journal in her apron pocket for 4 years. It had her grandfather's thumbprints worked into the cover, his shorthand, his pressed vine cuttings, his notes on every wine he'd made over 30 years in Sonoma Valley. Another time, she said. Jude didn't push. He sat on a storage crate, handed her a coffee, and said, All right, blind me. She poured him a glass from an unlabeled bottle. He swirled, sniffed, tasted. Pinot Noir, medium body, earthy, Oregon, Willamette Valley. Tara checked the bottom of the bottle, California, Sonoma Coast. He frowned. That structure is almost Burgundian. I know. It's from a small producer. My grandfather used to say the Sonoma Coast was the most misunderstood appellation in the country. She set her glass down. He had a vineyard there, Hendricks Ridge, 20 acres in the Russian River Valley. He built it himself over 30 years. A beat. He lost it when I was 12. What happened? The bank sold the property, the equipment, the aging stock. Everything went to a holding company. Jude looked at her. Which company? Tara's jaw tightened slightly. Wolfe Imports. The name sat between them. Sterling Wolfe's company, Jude said. Sterling Wolfe's company. The preliminary round was held in the main hall of the Boston Culinary Institute on a Tuesday afternoon. 30 entrants, 8 wines each, blind. Points for correct identification, regional designation, and vintage within 2 years. Tara wore her own clothes for the first time at one of these events. Dark slacks, a gray blouse, the leather journal tucked in her bag. She moved through the first 5 bottles with the focus of someone diffusing something that couldn't be rushed. Jude, sitting 3 rows from the judge's table with his press credential, watched her work in a way he didn't take notes on. The quality of her attention at the tasting station, the slight stillness before she committed an answer to paper, the way her shoulders unlocked after each one. The 6th bottle stopped her. She picked the glass up, set it back down, picked it up again, tilted it toward the light, her brow pulled together. She wrote Grenache, crossed it Nash, crossed that out too. She sat with it for a long moment, and then wrote her final answer. When the scores were posted, she had the second highest marks of the round, 7 of 8 correct. The 6th bottle, which she'd ultimately called a Côtes du Rhône Grenache blend, was a Grenache dominant GSM from McLaren Vale, Australia. Structurally close enough to fool most palates, not close enough for her standard. She was still staring at her answer sheet when Jude found her in the hallway. You made it through, he said. I called a McLaren Vale a Rhône. That's a rounding error. It's a continent error. He almost smiled. You found your version of wrong. She looked at him. Everyone has one specific category they keep missing, he said. You default to Rhône when the structure matches but the origin doesn't. We can fix that. She noticed the word and didn't say anything about it. When did this become a we situation, she asked. Somewhere around the Chateau Moreau correction, he said. Possibly the midnight tasting room. The preparation that followed was, by any reasonable measure, unreasonable. 4:30 in the morning. Jude across the table with a stopwatch, an analog thing he'd found in a junk drawer, the glass face slightly scratched, and a lineup of unlabeled Grenache and Grenache-adjacent pours. Name it, he said. Grenache. He flipped the bottle, Barossa Valley Shiraz. That's not even Grenache. I know. Another glass, she swirled, nosed, tasted Grenache. He flipped it, Monastrell, Spain. Also not Grenache. I'm seeing a pattern, she said. The pattern is that you reach for Grenache like it's a safety net. Heavy red fruit, low tannin, medium body. Your brain says Rhone even when it's not. She crossed her arms. My brain says what the wine smells like. Your brain is having a love affair with the Southern Rhone and it's affecting your accuracy. She laughed before she could stop it, a short, involuntary sound. Jude had the slightly startled expression of a man who hadn't expected that and wasn't sure what to do about it, which she found, against her better judgment, entirely disarming. You realize, she said, recovering, that you're lecturing me about wine when I've been studying it since I was 8. I'm not lecturing, I'm identifying a bias. Fine, identify yours. He set the stopwatch down. My bias, he said carefully, is that I spent the first 4 years of my career writing pieces that were partially funded by corporate wine sponsors, including a brief retainer with Wolfe Imports 8 years ago before I understood what I was signing. The seller went quiet. That's why you were at the gala, Tara said. I was invited. I stopped taking Wolfe's money 8 years ago when I realized the coverage I was producing was shaped toward his portfolio. He met her eyes. I'm telling you now because if it comes out later, I don't want it to look like I hid it. Tara looked at the table, at the row of unlabeled bottles, at her grandfather's journal lying open to a page he'd written in 1987. You should have told me earlier, she said. Yes. Give me a few days with it, she said, not coldly, just honestly. He nodded. He packed up the stopwatch and his notepad and left her alone with the wines and the low hum of the temperature controls. 3 days later, someone filed a complaint with the National Sommelier Challenge Committee, alleging that Tara Hendricks had accessed the preliminary tasting samples before the round. She found out from a text, then a voicemail from the committee administrator, then a screenshot circulating on a specialty wine forum showing what appeared to be a hotel storage access log with her name on it, time-stamped the night before the competition. Interesting how the dark horse server knew exactly which wines she'd be tasting. She stood in the hotel break room looking at her phone and felt something old and familiar settle in her chest. The feeling of being judged before anyone checked the facts. She called Jude. He answered on the second ring. I saw it, he said. The access log is from March. The hotel's system uses rotating timestamps and the display is broken. It shows the same 4 dates in every log entry. I can prove it. Then, let's prove it. It took 2 days, the hotel's IT director, and a fairly apologetic conversation about maintenance backlogs. The correct timestamps showed Tara had accessed the storage room on her regular off-shift schedule, none of which overlapped with the preliminary samples which had arrived in a separate secured location 48 hours before the event. The complaint was dismissed. But while she was clearing her name in that direction, she found something else entirely. She was in the hotel's archived supplier records, part of her regular inventory responsibilities, when she found a purchase order from 9 years ago. Wolfe Imports, a bulk sale of Hendricks Ridge estate stock, labeled under the Wolfe portfolio imprint. No mention of the originating vineyard. No mention of the winemaker. She found a second one, a third. Her grandfather's wines sold under someone else's name for years. She sat at the inventory desk for a long time, then she called Gil Rafferty. Gil Rafferty was 71, lived in a small house in Brookline, and had spent 40 years as a master sommelier before retiring to grow tomatoes and relitigate arguments with his neighbor's cat. He had also been Tara's grandfather, Elias Hendricks's closest friend in the industry, and had never spoken publicly about what happened to Hendricks Ridge. He opened the door before she knocked. I've been waiting for someone to come ask, he said. Gil's kitchen table held documentation he'd kept for over a decade. Purchase agreements, rebranding paperwork, a tasting assessment written in her grandfather's handwriting, submitted to Wolfe Imports as part of the acquisition and never publicly credited. He bought the vineyard in bankruptcy, Gil said, pouring coffee. Legal, clean on paper, but the wine Elias had aging in barrel, that was finished product. Sterling's team rebranded it, removed the Hendricks Ridge designation, sold it as Wolfe Imports Reserve. He looked at her steadily. Your grandfather suspected. He couldn't prove it. He didn't have the resources to fight back. Tara put the leather journal on the table next to the documents. Gil looked at it for a long moment. He gave you that, Gil said quietly. Before he died, he said it would explain everything when the time was right. Then I think, Gil said, the time is right. The National Sommelier Challenge final was held at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts Great Hall, hired for the occasion because the competition had, in the weeks since the preliminary, become unexpectedly large news. The story of the hotel wine steward who'd publicly corrected Sterling Wolfe had traveled through the industry press and then far beyond it. 12 finalists each, a live panel of judges. Sterling sat in the reserved section with the composure of a man who had already decided the outcome. Jude was in the press section with his notepad, and Tara noticed from backstage the scratched analog stopwatch in his jacket pocket. She had her grandfather's journal. When the sealed tasting decanters were brought to the finalist stations, Tara opened her fourth one and stopped. It was wrong. Not subtly wrong. Wrong the way that only matters if you have been tasting wine since you were 8 years old and can smell the difference between a wine that has been sitting correctly and one that has been opened, resealed, and stored at a slightly incorrect temperature, long enough for oxidation to change its character. She raised her hand. The head judge approached. She explained quietly what she was detecting. The judge took the decanter, nosed it, and frowned. "We'll have it tested," the judge said. "I'd like the original sealed backup sample substituted," Tara said. The room had gone very still. "That's an unusual request." "The unusual part," Tara said clearly, loud enough now for the front rows to hear, "is that someone opened this decanter before I did." Sterling's composure flickered for the first time all evening. The backup sample was retrieved. The original fourth decanter was sent to the event's on-site analyst. 20 minutes later, 20 minutes during which not a single person in the hall left their seat, the analyst returned with a written result. The decanter had been opened and resealed. The wine inside had been partially replaced with a different bottle. The event's security director pulled up camera footage on a tablet. A man in a maintenance uniform had entered the tasting room through a service door 6 hours earlier, his badge number traced to a contracted facilities company. The company's client contact for the booking was listed as Wolfe Imports. The hall went very quiet. Then the head judge said, into the room's microphone, that Sterling Wolfe was disqualified from the event under conduct provisions, and that any results he had influenced were under review. Sterling stood up. He said something about doctored footage, about competitive sabotage by other parties. His voice had the controlled quality of a man accustomed to owning rooms. Nobody moved toward him. Gil Rafferty stood up from the third row. "I have documentation," he said, "of years of unattributed wine sales by Wolfe Imports, produced from Hendricks Ridge estate stock without credit to the originating winemaker." He held up a folder. "Copies have been submitted to the Guild Ethics Board this morning." The hall went from quiet to something different. Tara stood at her finalist station and took a breath and finished her tasting. All 6 wines, not one. When the scores were announced, Tara Hendricks had the highest marks of the final round. The judges read the result with a formality that couldn't quite contain the collective exhale of an audience that had been holding its breath for 2 hours. Jude found her backstage, still carrying his notepad. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just held out the stopwatch. She looked at it. "Keep it," he said. "I have terrible timekeeping anyway." "Is that a metaphor?" "It's a stopwatch, and possibly also a metaphor, a beat. I should have told you about Wolfe from the beginning. I'm sorry." "You told me when you were ready to be honest," she said. "That's not nothing." "It's not enough, either." She looked at him steadily. "No," she said, "but it's a start." In the corner of the backstage area, a small orange tabby cat named Miso, who officially lived somewhere between the hotel's loading dock and the caterer's station, and had opinions about restricted access that could most charitably be described as flexible, walked calmly across the evidence folder Gil had set down, sat on it with territorial certainty, and began washing its face. "Is that your cat?" Jude asked. "Miso belongs to himself. He shows up when something important is happening." "Is that eerie or prophetic?" "Honestly, both." Jude looked at the cat looked at Jude. The cat returned to washing its face. "He doesn't seem impressed," Jude said. "He's never impressed, he just stays." 4 months later, the first bottle of Hendricks Ridge Reserve, reissued under the original label, with Elias Hendricks named as winemaker, produced from archived estate stock that Gil had quietly tracked through the secondary market for over a decade, sold at an industry auction for more than anyone had predicted. Tara stood at the back of the room when the lot closed. Jude was next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched, which neither of them moved to correct. He would have liked this, Jude said. He would have hated the auction format, Tara said. He thought wine shouldn't be sold like real estate. A pause. But he would have liked knowing the label was right. The label had his name in full: Elias Hendricks, winemaker, Russian River Valley. Nothing else, no secondary branding, no disclaimer, just his name where it had always belonged. Sterling Wolfe's company was under review by the Guild Ethics Board, and 2 separate legal challenges. He had released a statement through his attorney saying his team was cooperating fully. The statement was 17 sentences long and did not contain the word sorry once. Tara had read it once and then put her phone down. That night she opened the journal to her grandfather's last entry, a page she hadn't been able to read since the week he died because she hadn't been ready. "The vine doesn't know who planted it," he'd written, in the careful handwriting she'd known since she could read. "It just grows toward the light. Let the work be honest and the rest will sort itself." She closed the journal. Across the room, Jude was in a quiet standoff with Miso, who had appeared at the auction venue by means that remained unclear and was sitting directly on Jude's press credentials with the focused certainty of a cat who had decided this was non-negotiable. "How does he keep getting in?" Jude said. "I've stopped asking," Tara said. She walked over. She took the stopwatch from her jacket pocket, the one she now carried everywhere, the one that felt like an agreement, and held it for a moment. Then she put it back and reached for his hand instead. He looked down, then at her. "Is this?" he started. "Don't ask," she said. "Just stay." He did. Outside, the city moved the way it always did, indifferent and loud and entirely unconcerned with any of it, which was, Tara thought, exactly how her grandfather would have wanted the best things to happen. Not in front of an audience, not announced. Just quietly and on their own time and in a way that no one could undo once it was done.